Chapter 1, The Invitation to Belmore Hall. Hercule Poirot awoke to the soft chime of the Westminster clock, its measured tones carrying through his modest Mayfair flat. He stretched languidly upon the crisp white linen of his bed, then rose to attend to his morning ritual. With precise movements, he donned his tailored grey morning coat, adjusted his immaculate cravat with the delicate care of an artist framing a masterpiece, and smoothed each hair into place with the back of his fingernail. In the polished mahogany console in the hallway lay a single envelope, its parchment thick and cream-colored, sealed with a deep purple crest, the proud emblem of Belmore Hall. With a small twist of his moustache, Poirot slit open the envelope. The letter within was penned in a flowing copperplate script, each loop and descent radiating confidence. It bore the signature of Lady Millicent Hawthorne, widow of General Sir Lionel Hawthorne. The general, renowned for his distinguished service abroad and his discreet entanglements in matters of state, had, according to Lady Hawthorne's missive, left behind a memoir of considerable consequence, an account that touched upon whispered scandals and covert alliances. She entreated Poirot, with all politeness, to be present for the unveiling of these memoirs at Belmore Hall, situated amongst the rolling emerald pastures of Somerset. His presence, she suggested, would ensure that any delicate revelations were handled with discretion and, if necessary, with his renowned talent for discernment. By mid-morning, Poirot had summoned his reliable valet, Georges, to prepare the Lunardi motorcar for the 70-mile journey. He descended to the drive, fitted his silk gloves, and considered the day's prospects with a thoughtful frown. The skies above London were a pale iron grey, promising neither rain nor brimstone. As the car rattled away from Grosvenor Square, Poirot reclined, closing his eyes to commit the letters-telling phrases to memory. He reflected with satisfaction on the rare challenge this invitation presented: high-born hosts, hallowed halls, and possibly a tangle of inheritance disputes or clandestine liaisons, precisely the sort of tangled skein to which his little grey cells were irresistibly drawn. The journey southwards took them past hedgerows bedecked with wild roses and through tiny villages of honey-coloured stone cottages. Poirot scanned the changing scenery through the coach-like windows, noting the precise cadence of the horses' hoofs on the turnpike. Though he permitted himself a touch of reverie, remembering past cases in far-off locales, his mind was never far from its purpose, to discern motive, to observe the inconspicuous simmerings of human nature. He marveled at how easily secrets took root in placid settings, how the gentlest drawing-room conversation could conceal the sharpest of blades. At last, the motor car drew up before Belmore Hall. The mansion rose before him, its tall mullioned windows and crenellated parapets suggesting both centuries of tradition and the weight of untold stories. An avenue of ancient oaks led to a gravelled forecourt, where Lady Hawthorne waited on the wide stone steps. She was a statuesque figure in dove-grey silk, her silver hair coiffed with an elegance befitting her station. A cameo brooch at her throat caught the dwindling sunlight, casting a warm glow upon her serene features. "Monsieur Poirot, how kind of you to join us," she intoned, her voice steady despite the faint tremor in her left hand. "I trust the journey was comfortable." "Très bien, madame," replied Poirot, stepping down and offering the small of his gloved hand. "Your letter intrigued me greatly. General Hawthorne's memoirs promised to be most illuminating." Lady Hawthorne inclined her head. "Yes, indeed. There are details which some among us fear might prove disquieting." Her gaze flicked down the drive, where four figures waited in the morning light. First came Edward Hawthorne, nephew to the late general. He was a tall young man in the first flush of adulthood, his dark hair a little unruly and his expression restless. He offered a curt nod to Poirot, as though eager for secrets to unravel. Close behind him walked Celia Hawthorne, the general's niece. Slender and composed, she carried herself with a quiet grace, yet in her soft brown eyes Poirot discerned a flicker of unease. Flanking the Hawthorns were Mr. Hubert Clark, the publisher, a compact man whose ambition seemed to narrow his gaze, and Miss Florence Fletcher, the General's private secretary. Miss Fletcher's demeanour was immaculate, her manner reserved, but Poirot, adept at reading hidden emotion, sensed calculation behind her polite courtesy. Each guest wore their best morning attire, bespoke tailoring, discreetly polished shoes, and, quite conspicuously, no one bore the slightest trace of dust or fatigue, as though they anticipated no labour beyond genteel conversation. Within moments, Poirot found himself ushered through the grand entrance into the marbled vestibule, its walls lined with ancestral portraits whose stern visages watched impassively. Lady Hawthorn led the way into the great hall, where the memoirs lay upon a table draped in dark velvet. The aged manuscript, bound in leather and fastened with a tarnished clasp, exhaled the faint scent of must and ink. Poirot knelt to examine the embossed initials, L.H., entwined with a crowned laurel wreath. While the others admired the manuscript's venerable appearance, Poirot's practiced eye took in far more, the slight indentation upon the tablecloth where the binding had rested too firmly, a barely perceptible scuff upon the parquet flooring suggesting a hurried approach, the pattern of tiny fibres caught upon the tassel of the velvet cloth. Above all, he noted how each guest's posture, stiff, eager, anxious, spoke volumes. At dinner that evening, Poirot sat opposite Lady Hawthorn beneath the glimmer of crystal chandeliers. Conversation flowed of the General's exploits in distant campaigns, of the anticipated revelation of his memoirs. Yet Poirot noted, above the polite laughter, a haunting apprehension in every glance. Was it the prospect of scandal, the fear of exposure, or a more sinister motive that fluttered behind those drawn-together brows? That night, before retiring to the guest suite, Poirot excused himself to inspect the library where the memoir was kept. He paused at the threshold, illuminating the rows of leather-bound volumes with his silver-bodied lantern. He traced his finger lightly along the spines, noticing the precise order of the works, a chronology he would later commit to memory. The small brass plaque on the lectern bore the inscription, "To Truth, L.H." How fitting, he mused. Yet the hour was late, and the hush of Belmore Hall seemed thick with expectation. Closing the lantern, Poirot extinguished the last candle. His fingertips brushed the manuscript, and he inhaled the mingled scents of old leather and beeswax. Above that lay a subtle undertone, something floral, elusive, a thread that would, in due course, prove of the utmost importance. Chapter 2, The Unveiling and the Shock. The dawn broke pale and uncertain over the rolling lawns of Belmore Hall, yet within its venerable walls the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. In the oak-panelled drawing-room, rows of high-backed chairs had been arranged facing a polished mahogany lectern. Atop it, the long-awaited manuscript of General Sir Lionel Hawthorn lay bound in weathered leather, tied with a sombre ribbon. Outside, a low mist curled around the clipped hedges, but indoors every eye was bright with expectancy. Lady Hawthorn entered first, her silver hair swept back, pale lilac gown whispering on the polished floorboards. She paused by the lectern and smoothed the ribbon with a trembling hand. Behind her followed Mr. Hubert Clark, the publisher, his dark eyes glinting at the prospect of priceless revelations. Celia Hawthorn took her place to the right, composure itself, though Poirot caught the faint paling of her cheeks. Edward Hawthorn, restless and restless-looking, hovered at the back, hands clasped and unclasped in nervous rhythm. Miss Fletcher stood discreetly to one side, her notebook clasped with an air of professional detachment. Poirot surveyed them all from the front row. He noted the slight crease at the corner of Lady Hawthorn's mouth, a line of sorrow or resolve. He observed Clark's polished shoes, immaculate yet curiously scuffed at the toes, and the precise way Celia's silk gloves concealed her fingers. Above all, he inhaled the scents, the faint tang of beeswax polish, the underlying musk of old leather, and, most insistent, a whisper of lavender, sweet and out of place amidst the more somber fragrances. Lady Hawthorne raised her hands. "My friends, today we gather to honor my late husband's memory. He entrusted me with these memoirs, and I trust that Monsieur Poirot's presence will ensure their proper handling." She nodded toward the detective. With his customary nod in return, Poirot took up the ribbon and, with dignified care, untied it. The leather cover opened to reveal pages of fine, creamy parchment, the first lines written in a bold copperplate. Mr. Clark cleared his throat and began to read aloud. The General's voice, as captured on the page, was measured and laconic, recounting campaigns fought in distant deserts and jungles, alliances forged with foreign dignitaries, and the secret missions that had never seen the light of day. Celia leaned forward, fingers folded upon her knee. Edward shifted from heel to toe, as though the General's words weighed heavily upon him. Miss Fletcher recorded every nuance, her pen scratching softly. Halfway through the second chapter, the lamps overhead flickered, their flames dancing uncertainly as if caught by an unseen breeze. A moment later, the gaslight guttered and died, plunging the room into a pregnant darkness. A soft gasp rippled through the assembly. "Good heavens!" exclaimed Clark, rising to his feet. Lady Hawthorne clutched her pearls. Poirot, unperturbed, slid from his chair and lit a slender taper from a nearby sconce. Its glow revealed Celia's startled face, pale beneath the black shadows, and Edward's swift retreat to the back of the room. It was in that flash of dim illumination that the General himself, seated in his favorite armchair beside the lectern, stirred, as though roused by the shifting air. The manuscript slipped from his trembling hand, fluttering to the carpet in a scatter of loose pages. Before anyone could rise to assist, Sir Lionel slumped forwards, a faint, broken sigh escaping his lips. Onto the faded Turkish rug beside him dripped a dark stain, spreading beneath the General's coat. Poirot was at the body in an instant. He knelt, placing a gentle hand on the General's wrist. No pulse. The assembly fell silent, breath held. Poirot's taper illumined the aged features of Sir Lionel, lined with years of hardship but calm in death. With a poised motion, Poirot stood and gently closed the General's eyes. "Miss Amis," he announced softly, "it is too late." A collective cry rose, Lady Hawthorne's sob, Edward's strangled exclamation, Celia's white-lipped whisper. Once order was restored, Poirot waved a steadying hand. "We must treat this as more than mere misadventure. The manuscript has been disturbed, and I note that certain pages are missing." He pointed at the empty space on the carpet where the final chapters should have lain. Mr. Clark, aghast, muttered that the pages must have been lost in the blackout. Lady Hawthorne insisted they were priceless. Miss Fletcher, still clutching her notebook, claimed she saw a figure depart through the French windows just before the lamps expired. Poirot surveyed the room with unerring calm. He knelt to inspect the scattered papers. The edges bore signs of tearing, as if someone had hastily plucked them free. On the arm of the nearest chair he found a small scrap of pale purple embroidery, frayed at the edges. He touched it with his gloved fingertip, silk fine, threaded with silver, a fragment that spoke of haste and of concealment alike. Turning, Poirot noticed Celia's hand tremble against the armrest, and Edward's cufflink, a golden hawthorn crest, dangling loose. There, upon the polished floorboards, lay a footprint, faint but evident, the sole's pattern too fine for a house slipper, yet too small for Mr. Clark's booted shoes. Poirot stood, raising the taper aloft. "We have, I fear, a matter far more serious than a power failure," he declared. "A gentleman's final words have been stolen, and a life has been taken. Until I ascertain what has happened, no one may leave this room." He looked to Lady Hawthorne. You invited me for discretion. Be assured, every detail shall be handled with utmost care. I shall require full cooperation from everyone here." She nodded, tears in her eyes but resolve on her lips. Clark bristled but bowed. Celia drew a steadying breath. Edward swallowed visibly. Miss Fletcher offered a curt inclination, her pen poised but her face unreadable. As Poirot's gaze swept the gathering, he inhaled once more that curious note of lavender, more pungent now, as though carried upon some whispered breath. It seemed to emanate from the very walls, beckoning him to follow its trail. With his characteristic grace, he bade Lady Hawthorne to have water fetched for her guests and dismissed them briefly into the corridor, where oil lamps flickered with a steadier flame. Alone in the drawing-room, Poirot allowed his little grey cells to begin their work. He methodically examined the lectern, testing for hidden catches or false panels. He traced the worn grain of the armchair's leather, noting how the general's weight had settled one armrest more deeply. He lifted the corner of the rug, revealing a small stain upon the floorboards, damp, fresh, and unsettlingly out of place. Above all, Poirot centered his attention upon that scrap of purple embroidery and the peculiar scent that clung to it. Lavender, yes, but intensified, almost medicinal. It was no mere perfume, but a distillative purpose, something that would unlock a door to motive. He placed the scrap in a small envelope, to be examined more closely by daylight. As the guests filtered back, sighting one another with guarded glances, Poirot reseated himself by the lifeless form of Sir Lionel. He let the silence settle like a cloak. Outside, the mist had lifted, revealing a sky washed with pale blue. And yet within the walls of Belmore Hall, a darker mist had descended, one of suspicion, of hidden resentments, and of secrets waiting to be revealed. Poirot's gaze remained fixed upon the scattered memoir, resolved to unearth truth from its torn pages. In the hush of that moment, the great detective's mind moved faster than any heartbeat, ready to piece together the puzzle that fate had so ruthlessly scattered. Chapter 3, Guests and Gwillables. By mid-morning, Belmore Hall's drawing-room had regained an uneasy calm. The storm clouds had passed, but a different kind of tension lingered in the air. Poirot, his poise as immaculate as ever, invited the household to reconvene around the grand fireplace. Lady Hawthorne, her usually steadfast composure now laced with quiet apprehension, sat beside Mr. Hubert Clark, whose tailored suit seemed to bristle with barely contained impatience. Opposite them, Edward Hawthorne's lanky frame trembled ever so slightly, while Celia Hawthorne maintained her serene posture, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Miss Fletcher, ever the professional, hovered at the edge, her notebook ready. "Miss Amis," began Poirot, his voice measured and courteous, "we have a most serious matter to resolve. Sir Lionel's death, and the disappearance of pages from his memoir, cannot be left unexplained. I shall ask you each a few questions, and I trust your candor." His dark eyes, like polished onyx, swept the room, resting momentarily on each face. He noted that Edward's cufflink, once secure, was now slightly askew, and that Celia's silk gloves bore a faint smudge, perhaps of ink, perhaps of something more sinister. First, he turned to Edward. "Monsieur, you appeared most unsettled during the reading. Can you recall precisely where you stood when the lights failed?" Edward swallowed. I was at the back, near the French windows. I thought to secure the manuscript when the lights went out." He paused, rubbing his temple, the fine skin flushing pink. "I heard nothing but a brief scuffle and then the general fell." Poirot inclined his head, mentally noting the rapid pulse at Edward's wrist when he dabbed it with a white handkerchief. Next, Poirot addressed Celia. "Mademoiselle, you faintly gasped when the lamps flickered. Were you alarmed by something in the manuscript?" Celia's composure wavered for the briefest instant. The memoir, there was mention of a clandestine affair. I felt it too personal, too painful. She touched a slender finger to her lips. But I saw no one. In that instant, Poirot detected the scent of lavender again, lighter than before, yet unmistakable. Mr. Clark shifted in his seat. "I can speak for myself," he interjected briskly. "I was simply concerned that the blackout might damage the precious pages. A faulty gas valve, I suspect." His polished shoes tapped on the parquet in an anxious staccato. Poirot observed the scuffs on Clark's right toe, a contradiction to his protestations of concern. They suggested hurried movement immediately prior to the lamp failure. Miss Fletcher, summoned last, closed her notebook with deliberate care. I remained by the lectern to assist Lady Hawthorne. At no point did I leave the General's side. Her tone was even, yet Poirot noticed her knuckles whitening as she gripped the leather cover of her book. He recorded the tremor, comparing it to the steadiness of her handwriting in the minutes that followed. At Poirot's request, the footman, young James, was admitted. Under Poirot's gentle scrutiny, James recounted a curious detail. "I did see a shadow flit past the window, sir, just before the lights went out. It was dark, but I'm certain it was not one of the ladies or gentlemen assembled." He hesitated. "And, sir, I thought I caught a whiff of something, lavender, perhaps, though I dare say I'm no judge of scents." Mrs. Price, the housekeeper, was summoned next. She trudged in, her apron pristine but her cheeks flushed. Lady Hawthorne's loyal confidant looked sharply at Poirot. "Scent? Lavender?" "I smelt nothing but the usual polish and old leather. I was in the corridor at the time, checking on the staff." Her flat tone bore no hint of the faint fragrance that Poirot perceived. This discrepancy piqued his interest. Poirot rose, folding his hands. "Thank you all. Your observations are invaluable. There are notes to be made, and fragments to examine further." He approached the vacant lectern and retrieved the scrap of purple embroidery he had found earlier. Holding it before the company, he remarked, "This silk fragment was discovered upon the nearest chair. Have any of you a fabric of this hue?" A tense silence followed, none laid claim. As the assembled glanced nervously at one another, Poirot allowed them a moment's reflection. Then, softly, "Monsieur Clark, you say you worried about the gas valve, yet your shoes bear fresh mud that does not match the lawns of Belmore, but perhaps the undergrowth beyond the conservatory." Clark's eyes darted, and he shifted his gaze to the windows. Lady Hawthorne's breath caught. Edward swallowed hard, Celia's lips quivered, and Fletcher's pen hesitated. Poirot's little grey cells stirred. He had heard James's mention of the shadow, noted the contradiction in Mrs. Price's senses, and now observed Clark's muddied footwear. He suspected a staged blackout, a prepared concealment, and an orchestrated theft of the final memoir pages. Straightening, Poirot concluded, "Until I examine certain areas more closely, the conservatory, the grounds beyond, and the secret compartment within Sir Lionel's desk, I must ask you all to remain within Belmore Hall. No one is to depart until the truth emerges." He swept his gaze over the assembly one last time, detecting in each countenance a flicker of fear, guilt, or relief. As the household dispersed under the watchful eyes of the footman, Poirot remained by the hearth, contemplating the disparate clues, the misaligned cufflink, Celia's ink-smudged glove, Clark's anxious scuffs, Fletcher's unwavering calm, James's shadow, Mrs. Price's denial, and that elusive lavender, now a key to unlock the tangled web. Alone, he murmured to the empty room, "Patience, patience. The little grey cells will illuminate the path." Outside, a solitary raven cried, a herald, perhaps, of revelations to come. Chapter 4, A Hidden Correspondence. That afternoon, after a sparse luncheon in the sunlit dining room, Poirot requested a few moments' solitude. He rose from the table with his usual grace, bidding Lady Hawthorne, "Madam, if you will excuse me, I intend to revisit the library. There are certain minutiae I wish to verify." His voice was calm, yet behind it lurked the impatience of a mind intent on investigation. As the others exchanged puzzled glances, Poirot slipped away, his cane clicking softly on the polished oak floor. The library door stood ajar, as though awaiting his arrival. Inside, the afternoon light slanted through tall mullioned windows, illuminating rows of leather-bound volumes that climbed 2 stories to a high corniced ceiling. The rich aroma of beeswax polish blended with the faint mustiness of old paper. Poirot surveyed the room at a glance, every shelf in precise alphabetical order, every desk drawer closed, and not a book misplaced, except for one. On the middle shelf, a slim volume lay slightly forward of its neighbors, its spine unaligned. The smallest irregularity, he knew, could conceal the greatest secrets. Approaching with measured steps, Poirot pressed his fingertip to the misaligned spine. A barely audible click echoed. The shelf swung inward on well-concealed hinges, revealing a narrow recess behind. Heart quickening, Poirot reached in and extracted a delicate envelope of vellum. Its edges were browned with age, the seal broken but the letter intact. He replaced the shelf and closed it with as much care as he had opened it, then returned to the well-lit desk to examine his discovery. Unfolding the vellum, Poirot noted the ink's faded hue, a deep brown that had once been black. The handwriting was neat yet severe, each letter inclined at the same determined angle. He read, "Lionel, if ever you dare disclose what transpired at Belmore in the summer of 1894, your honor, and that of your family, shall be forfeit. You know the consequences. Remain silent, or face disgrace." The letter was unsigned, its threat chilling in its brevity. Poirot's little grey cells raced, a warning set down more than 30 years ago, referencing an event unmentioned in the memoir itself. Was it political intrigue, a scandal of the heart, or an indiscretion best buried? The aged parchment suggested long-standing fear, a motive powerful enough to persist across decades. Setting the letter aside, Poirot turned his attention to the grand fireplace opposite. The hearth soot bore an unusual pattern, a dark semicircle that hinted at recent activity. He knelt to inspect the ashes and discovered a half-burned scrap of parchment. Carefully, he retrieved it with tweezers from his coat pocket and cradled it by the window light. The fragment bore spidery characters, partial sentences from the final chapter of Sir Lionel's memoir, now charred and illegible in places. Beside the scrap lay a broken quill, its nib snapped clean, and a smudge of vivid purple ink upon the hearthstone. Poirot studied the quill. The nib's fracture was fresh, the fracture line crisp. The purple ink was not the standard hue found in gentlemen's desks, it was richer, almost ceremonial. He pressed a fingertip to the smear, laundry water, and a quick test confirmed a botanical base. Lavender, unmistakably. The same floral note that had lingered in the drawing room, the same that had clung to Miss Fletcher's stationery kit, flickering in Poirot's memory. Returning to the fragment, Poirot examined the handwriting's irregular strokes. Some letters curved more sharply, others drooped languidly. He compared these to the neat pages in Miss Fletcher's notebook, the loops of her lowercase e, the flourish on her t. They matched. His brows lifted, Miss Fletcher's outward serenity masked a capacity for clandestine toil. Why had she attempted to destroy the concluding pages? And in such haste? With gloved precision, Poirot folded the letter and the fragment, placing both into separate envelopes marked Exhibit A and Exhibit B. He slipped them into an inner pocket of his waistcoat. Though eager to disclose his findings, he recognized the necessity of gathering further corroboration before confronting any individual. A faint creak in the corridor warned that his inspection might be observed. Poirot straightened and strolled from the library, pausing to close the hidden shelf with a gentle push. No one would suspect its recent disturbance. As he reached the antechamber, he encountered the footman, James, lingering uncertainly. "Tout va bien, monsieur," James ventured, surprised to see him so soon. "Ah, James," Poirot replied, smiling. "Just confirming that the library remains in good order. You may resume your duties." With that, he resumed his measured gait back toward the drawing room, leaving James reassured and oblivious. Inside the drawing room, Lady Hawthorne and the others were assembled. They glanced up at his arrival, exchanging silent questions. Poirot greeted them with cordial courtesy, seating himself near the hearth. He observed their demeanors closely. Edward's fingers drummed anxiously on the arm of his chair. Celia's gloved hands lay still, yet her eyes darted between Poirot and the fireplace. Mr. Clark's soles shifted restlessly upon the carpet. Miss Fletcher's posture remained impeccable, but Poirot discerned a subtle tightening of her jaw. He allowed a moment of contemplation before speaking. "Miss Amis, I have undertaken a few inquiries this afternoon. It is clear that the affair of this morning is no simple accident." His tone was gentle, yet carried authority. "Tomorrow, I shall require access to certain private papers and to the grounds beyond the conservatory. For now, I ask only your patience and cooperation." As he spoke, a distant rumble of thunder underscored his words. Outside, the sky darkened with gathering storm clouds. Poirot inhaled deeply, drawing in the charged air of impending rain. Within the library's hidden recess lay evidence of a threat predating the very memoir we seek to understand. In the hearth's ashes, fragments of the truth lay half destroyed. And in the faces before him, the stirrings of guilt, fear, and relief flickered like the shadows cast by the dying afternoon sun. With a courteous nod, Poirot rose. "I trust you will all find comfort in this room until supper. I, for my part, shall spend the remainder of the day assembling my thoughts." As he departed, the guests exchanged uneasy glances. Piecing together the secrets of Belmore Hall, Poirot knew, would require both subtlety and resolve, and the revelations yet to come would demand more than courage alone. Chapter 5, The Puzzle Deepens. That evening's supper was served by lamplight in the panelled dining room, whose walls bore sombre portraits of the Hawthorne ancestors. A hush fell as Lady Hawthorne entered, followed by her guests in solemn procession. The long table was laid with gleaming silver and porcelain. At its head, Poirot surveyed the company with mild amusement, aware that even the most elegant repast could become an arena for truth. He began the meal with a light anecdote of his recent journey from London, recounting the peculiar taste of afternoon tea in Bath and the curious habits of a shopkeeper's cat. As he spoke, he watched Edward Hawthorne's manner, the way Edward's fork quivered, as if he half expected the next course to choke him. Poirot related the story of the Bath cat pausing mid-meow, and Edward's mouth twitched into an involuntary smile, one that vanished as swiftly as it came. Celia Hawthorne sat to Poirot's right, her dark hair coiled neatly. She accepted a glass of Burgundy with steady hands, though her eyes flicked toward Miss Fletcher whenever the conversation glided too close to family affairs. Poirot mentioned, in passing, the exquisite embroidery upon a local seamstress's work, a deliberate nod toward the violet thread he had found in the library. Celia's gaze fell to her lap, where the delicate silk of her skirt bore no sign of stray fibers. She excused herself momentarily, murmuring that her glove required replacement. Across the table, Mr. Hubert Clark attacked his game pie with unaccustomed zeal. "Such a robust flavor," he declared, wiping his mouth. Poirot complimented the chef on the crust's precise flakiness. Clark's compliment came a bit too late, and he shifted in his seat, dislodging a scrap of paper onto the polished floor. Poirot retrieved it, a stub of black-edged telegram, addressed in hurried handwriting to L.H. The message read only, "Stop publication, must speak at once. Arrival midnight." The initials matched Sir Lionel's, the abrupt tone suggested urgency. Poirot tucked the scrap into his waistcoat pocket for later analysis. As the main course gave way to strawberries and cream, Poirot turned to Miss Fletcher. "Mademoiselle, you have been remarkably composed these past hours. Pray tell me, did you attend to the General during the blackout?" Fletcher's lips curved in a faint smile. "I remained at Lady Hawthorne's side," she replied. "I did not approach Sir Lionel until the lights returned." Poirot noted the steadiness of her tone, but also the way a single bead of sweat formed at her temple. He murmured a polite reproof about staying hydrated, watching the bead roll down her cheek to vanish beneath her collar. Edward cleared his throat and glanced at his sister. "I received a telegram from our solicitor this afternoon," he volunteered. It concerned the legal rights to the memoir. He produced a folded note stamped with the Hawthorne family seal. Poirot extracted and read it by the glow of the chandelier. Urgent. Clause thereon enables niece to claim inheritance if direct descendant emerges. See me upon arrival. Poirot's moustache twitched. That clause did not appear in the General's known will. The solicitor's imminent arrival, and the missing memoir pages, suggested someone sought to reshape Sir Lionel's legacy. Lady Hawthorne leaned forward. "This complicates matters beyond mere publication," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "We must consider motive, not just opportunity." She smoothed the lace at her throat, revealing a faint ink smudge on her fingertip. She seemed unaware of it. Poirot caught the light reflecting off a tiny fleck of purple on the lace itself, matching neither Celia's skirt nor the fragment from the fireplace. A sudden knock at the door interrupted the gathering. The footman entered, bearing a small parcel addressed to Sir Lionel in Lady Hawthorne's handwriting. Inside lay a delicate ivory key, its handle carved like a fleur-de-lis. Poirot recognized it at once, the key to Sir Lionel's private desk, the one he had observed locked since his arrival. With the key in hand, the guests exchanged glances, some apprehensive, some hopeful. Completing the final course, Poirot requested permission to examine the desk that very night. Lady Hawthorne consented, though her knuckles whitened as she pressed the key into his palm. "I only discovered it in my dressing room," she admitted. "It lay upon my writing table." Her confession implied that the key's absence earlier had been deliberate, but her distress suggested she did not anticipate its resurfacing. Poirot, however, dared not comment yet. After dinner, the household dispersed into the corridors. Poirot lingered, his keen eyes absorbing the lingering scents of port and rosewater. He revisited the drawing room, where the lacquered desk stood under a single lamp's glow. Carefully, he tested the key in the lock. It turned with a faint click. Inside, he discovered the missing chapters of the memoir, neatly folded and secured by a lavender-scented ribbon. Beneath them lay 3 items: a photograph of Sir Lionel in young uniform, a folded piece of vellum inscribed with ciphered text, and an envelope bearing Edward's name. The cipher, Poirot recognized, matched the smudged fragment recovered from the hearth. He extracted the vellum and, by lamplight, deciphered a date, July 1894, and a reference to the summer spent at Belmore, where certain truths had been buried. The cipher's solution implicated an unnamed third party, one whose identity remained hidden but whose involvement was undeniable. When he replaced the contents and closed the desk, Poirot felt the weight of his discoveries. The restored pages meant that the memoir would soon see the light, but not before its revelations affected every person in the house. The cipher hinted at a pact among three: the general, a partner in secrecy, and the author of the threatening letter. Poirot pondered the solicitor's telegram, the desk key's journey, and the ink-smudged lace. Each piece formed a strand in a larger web. Returning the key to his pocket, Poirot extinguished the lamp. As the hush of night descended, he lingered in the corridor's shadows. Above him, portraits of Hawthorne ancestors gazed down with enduring solemnity. He closed his eyes, letting the day's clues drift through his mind: the fork's quiver, the smile that vanished, the scrap of telegram, the secret key, and the cipher's promise of undisclosed truths. None of these revelations stood alone, each intersected with the next to form a pattern. Softly, Poirot pressed a gloved hand to his chest. "Patience," he whispered to himself. "The final moves have been made. Now, to observe the players as they respond." With methodical poise, he slipped away into the night, his little grey cells poised for the next challenge. The puzzle had deepened indeed, and was far from complete. Chapter 6, Night of Shadows. The hush of Belmore Hall at 11:30 carried a hush more profound than mere absence of sound. The guests had retired to their respective suites, their footsteps echoing along polished corridors before fading into the soft carpet. Lady Hawthorne and her nephew Edward exchanged hushed words in the drawing-room, while Celia sought refuge in the conservatory to steady her nerves. Mr. Clark paced the library, reviewing the recovered pages, and Miss Fletcher lingered at the foot of the grand staircase, as though reluctant to retire. Only Poirot remained in the dimly lit hall, seated in the high-backed chair by the hearth, silently assembling the day's discoveries in his mind. Poirot's little grey cells worked tirelessly. He contemplated the ciphered vellum, the telegram to L.H., and the lavender-scented ribbon that bound the missing memoir chapters. The solicitor's midnight arrival loomed, and the intricate motives of each household member grew ever more entangled. He had taken the precaution of stationing a discreet footman outside the conservatory and another by the library, under the guise of nighttime vigils. Yet, as the clock on the grand staircase struck the 11th chime, an abrupt, blood-curdling scream rent the stillness and sent a jolt through his calm façade. Poirot rose with measured speed and issued a single command: "Monsieur James, bring a lamp." Mme Price roused the others. The footman James hurried, while the housekeeper's low cry summoned the household from their rooms. Shuffling in slippers and dressing gowns, the party converged upon the source of the disturbance, the conservatory. Through the glass-paned door Poirot perceived a scene of controlled chaos: overturned palms in pots, a puddle of water on the tiled floor, and Miss Fletcher sprawled near the marble fountain. With the lamp's glow illuminating the shards of glass, Poirot stepped inside. The statuette of a greyhound, once perched on a pedestal, now lay in two pieces, its plinth rolling beneath a shattered potted fern. Miss Fletcher lay unconscious upon the tiled pavement, one silk-gloved hand clutching a fragment of vellum. Celia knelt beside her, her nightdress bunched at the knees, eyes wide with alarm. Lady Hawthorne shivered beside the fountain, her hand pressed to her mouth, while Edward hovered at the door frame. Poirot knelt to examine Miss Fletcher. The private secretary's forehead bore a small contusion, and from her lips escaped faint groans. Gently, Poirot relieved the fragment of vellum from her grip and stowed it in an envelope. "A shaken nervous system," he murmured as he examined the contusion. "Nothing irreparable, but capable of inducing unconsciousness." He signaled Edward to fetch brandy and a cool cloth, then turned his attention to the room itself: scuffed tiles at the door, water trails leading to the fountain, and the broken statuette's base scarred with mud. As eyes roamed the conservatory, Poirot noted a narrow slip of paper beneath the fern's broken pot. Retrieving it delicately, he read the scrawled words: "You cannot stop what has begun." The ink was violet-tinged, the script trembling. He placed it with the battered statuette, then examined the glass door. One pane bore a jagged crack, suggesting deliberate force rather than accidental collapse. Beyond the door lay the dew-soaked gravel of the rose garden, now imprinted with footprints. Poirot stooped, brushing aside fallen petals to reveal two distinct sets of footprints, one small, narrow, and neat, as though from a lady's slipper, the other larger, broader, and slightly irregular. He flexed his fingers, recalling Celia's slender shoes, then Mr. Clark's bespoke boots with their custom-made soles. The smaller prints matched neither, but the larger corresponded to the pattern of Clark's brogues. Yet, the depth of the prints was slight, as if unwittingly donned by someone unaccustomed to his footwear. While he examined the footprints, Poirot caught sight of a vivid thread of purple caught between the tiles, brighter than the lavender-scented ribbon. The embroidery suggested new material, perhaps from fine evening wear recently rent. He pocketed the thread, noting that its intensity contrasted sharply with the paler weave of Miss Fletcher's uniform and the lilac of Lady Hawthorne's gown. This thread, he deduced, belonged to neither aunt nor secretary, but to someone with a wardrobe of deeper hues. Summoning the assembled household into the conservatory, Poirot addressed them in calm authority. "Miss Amis, we have witnessed an escalation. Miss Fletcher has been attacked to prevent her testimony regarding the theft of Sir Lionel's final pages." He displayed the torn vellum and the threatening note. "The footprints there point to one individual, and this bright embroidery," he held up the purple thread, "to another. I shall continue my inquiries in the morning, but for tonight, none may retire further afield." Their faces, lit by the flickering lamp, revealed shock, guilt, or relief in equal measure. Celia trembled as Poirot explained that he would require each to produce their footwear for comparison, and to remain within sight until dawn. Edward paled, Lady Hawthorne trembled, and Mr. Clark's gaze darkened. Even Miss Fletcher, now revived and wrapped in a shawl, met his eye with a quiet nod. The air in the conservatory, suffused with the scent of broken palms and abrupt violence, seemed to pulse with unspoken confessions. Retiring last, Poirot paused at the doorway. He inhaled the cool night air drifting through the broken pane. "The night is but a veil," he mused, "yet within it are shadows that whisper truths. Tomorrow, in broad daylight, we will illuminate them fully." With measured dignity, he closed the conservatory door and left the household under the watchful guard of the footman, the echo of his words lingering like the scent of lavender in the still night. Chapter 7, Reflections of the Mind. Morning light crept through the tall sash windows of Belmore Hall, illuminating motes of dust that danced in the still air. In the small morning room off the drawing room, Poirot summoned the household with characteristic courtesy. Lady Hawthorne, in a simple morning gown of dove grey, entered first, followed by Edward, whose dark circles bespoke a night of restless guilt. Celia arrived next, carrying her gloves and a single rose, her composure intact though her eyes betrayed a hidden turmoil. Mr. Clark appeared beside her, his polished boots still bearing a faint trace of the garden's damp earth, and finally Miss Fletcher glided in, serene yet paler than the morning light, supporting herself upon one hand as though nursing an unseen injury. The footman arranged cups of Earl Grey and plates of delicate buttered toast upon a low side table. Poirot, standing before a small assortment of objects laid out upon a silver tray, directed the staff to withdraw. The tray held 4 items: a torn scrap of vellum bound in lavender-scented ribbon, the gold hawthorn cufflink Edward claimed he had misplaced, a worn leather ledger Clark had in his possession, and a tiny phial of lavender oil. Poirot's pale eyes flicked between the objects and the gathered faces, as though the items themselves were silent witnesses to the night's events. Turning first to Edward, Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Monsieur Hawthorne, you wore this cufflink while declaring you could not approach your uncle in the darkness. Yet last night it was discovered beneath the lectern. Edward's hand trembled as he reached for his cup. I must have dropped it when I stepped forward," he stammered. Poirot noted the faint stain of ink upon the cufflink's edge, ink that matched neither Sir Lionel's pen nor the smudge upon Celia's glove. "Curious," Poirot murmured, "that the link should carry such a mark." Edward's cheeks flushed. He could not meet Poirot's gaze. Poirot then faced Celia. "Mademoiselle, you entered the conservatory while your sister, Miss Fletcher, lay unconscious, clutching a fragment of vellum. You brought with you a single rose, yet the conservatory holds no such bloom at this season. Would you explain?" Celia's lips pressed together. "I found this rose in my uncle's dressing room," she confessed softly. "I wished to lay it upon his desk, in memory." Poirot examined the rose, noting its petals bore a residue of beeswax, a residue only present on the dressing room furniture polish. A thoughtful gesture, he acknowledged, yet oddly placed. Celia's fingers twined in her lap. Poirot could almost hear her resolve gathering strength as she remained silent. Mr. Clark's polished shoes clicked upon the parquet as he shifted his stance. "This ledger," he began, drawing it from his coat pocket, "contains my notes on the memoir's prospective print run." He flipped through the pages, but Poirot interrupted. "Yes, but your ledger shows entries dated last night, long after you claimed to be in your suite. The mud upon your cuff suggests a journey across the garden, does it not?" Clark's jaw tightened. "I sought fresh air," he replied curtly, "to contemplate the manuscript's finer points." Poirot gently tapped the ledger. "Then perhaps you might explain why the entry of Chapters 8X is crossed out in purple ink, identical to this vial's contents." He lifted the glass vial. Clark's eyes darkened. He abruptly folded the ledger and handed it back. At last, Poirot turned to Miss Fletcher. She perched upon the edge of a straight-backed chair, her silk blouse clinging damply to her temples. "Mademoiselle, you professed to be at Lady Hawthorne's side when the blackout occurred. Yet this vial of lavender oil was found within your handbag." He held it aloft. "You claimed the scent might calm my nerves upon arrival, but it was never offered." Fletcher's expression remained inscrutable. "I plan to use it later," she said. "I did not wish to alarm anyone with unfamiliar fragrance." Poirot frowned. An extraordinary precaution for an unremarkable evening. He considered her steady tone and the bruise upon her hand, the bruise she claimed came from the statuette in the conservatory. As silence settled, Poirot allowed his gaze to drift around the room, mapping the positions each had occupied during the readings, the blackout, and the attack. He recalled the footprints in the dew-damp rose garden, the torn pages hidden in the fireplace ashes, the threatening note beneath the fern. Each element shimmered in his mind, a jewel awaiting its final setting. Yet the arrangement remained incomplete. One critical piece eluded him still. "Lady Hawthorne," voice low, ventured, "Monsieur Poirot, is there anything you require?" He inclined his head with genteel courtesy. "Only time, madam. And perhaps a moment to retire and assemble these fragments more fully. I shall call you again this evening, once the solicitor has arrived, for your observations on any recent verbal exchanges." A flicker of relief passed across Lady Hawthorne's face at the mention of the solicitor, a fresh mind to witness her truth. With that, Poirot dismissed them to their rooms. Edward departed with a hurried bow. Celia lingered to smooth her rose-colored gown. Clark offered a curt nod. Fletcher simply inclined her head. One by one they left the morning room, hearts pounding with speculation and dread. Only Poirot remained, his slender figure framed by the pale curtain. Alone, he gathered the tray's contents and returned them to his suite. There, within the sanctum of his mind, he arranged the evidence, the ribbon and vellum, the smudged cufflink, the beeswax-stained rose, Clark's crossed-out ledger, the oil file, the ciphered letters. He recalled Celia's measured tears, Edward's forced calm, Clark's stiff retort, Fletcher's steady gaze. Motive and opportunity swirled together, yet one extraordinary detail, something he had glimpsed but not yet grasped, hovered just beyond his reach. Settling at his writing table, Poirot lit a single lamp. He placed each item before him, then leaned back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Outside, the first raindrops tapped against the window pane. Poirot closed his eyes, allowing the patter to become the tempo of his little grey cells. Patience, he whispered to himself. Tomorrow, the moment of revelation shall arrive. And with that, he let the shadows of Belmore Hall fall gently around him, confident that at last the full picture would emerge from the haze. Chapter 8, Justice Served. The morning sun streamed unimpeded through the tall windows of the drawing room, casting pale rectangles upon the carpet. Lady Hawthorne, pale but resolute, sat beside her nephew Edward, who glanced nervously at the mantel clock. Celia Hawthorne stood by the French doors, hands clasped before her, while Mr. Clark lingered near the bookcase, adjusting his tie. Miss Fletcher remained seated at the writing desk, her composure as flawless as her attire. Poirot entered, cane in hand, and bade them all draw near. On a small table lay the critical exhibits, the torn pages of the memoir, the phial of lavender oil, the purple thread, and the aged letter from the hidden recess. Miss Amos, Poirot began, voice calm yet commanding, the time has come to untangle the web of deceit that envelops us. He first addressed the lavender oil. This oil was not chosen for its fragrance alone. Analysis reveals it was laced with digitalis, a slow-acting poison extracted from foxglove. Sir Lionel's collapse was no accident of candlelight but the culmination of repeated doses administered during the reading. He held aloft the small phial. The scent masked its toxicity, only a practiced chemist would suspect foul play. Miss Fletcher, you were the only person with ready access to your writing kit, where the oil was stored. He laid the phial down and removed the torn final pages of the memoir. These pages contained explicit reference to an heir presumptive, a daughter born in secrecy. They threaten to expose your identity, mademoiselle. He turned to Fletcher. You tore them out and attempted to destroy them by fire. When the flame died, you concealed a fragment in the fireplace. Pointing to the spot in the hearth where he had retrieved the charred scrap, Poirot continued, you then applied purple-tinted ink, an imitation of Sir Lionel's handwriting, to forge a letter dating from 1894. That letter was hidden behind the library shelf to frighten him into silence. The assembled gasped. Poirot reached for the purple thread. You draped this thread upon the embroidery of your uniform to stage a struggle. When you attacked yourself with the statuette in the conservatory, you sought to implicate another. Yet the thread's weave is exclusive to your evening gown's trim. He held it between thumb and forefinger. Even the footprints betray you. You slipped on Celia's slippers for the smaller prints and Mr. Clark's boots for the larger, ensuring that suspicion would fall elsewhere. Edward's face drained of color. Clark's brow furrowed in confusion. Celia drew a sharp breath. Fletcher's calm mask finally cracked. Her eyes glistened, lips trembling. Yes, she whispered. I confess. The room fell silent. Poirot inclined his head, urging her to continue. I am his daughter, she said, voice breaking. I discovered the truth only last year when cleaning the General's papers. He refused to acknowledge me, to share his legacy. I despaired, and my bitterness turned to vengeance. She pointed to the phial. I began by slipping the oil into his cup, then the light trick and theft to cover my guilt. Lady Hawthorne pressed a handkerchief to her lips. Edward sank into his seat. Celia buried her face in her hands. Mr. Clark swallowed and glanced away. Fletcher's confession tumbled forth in shivering bursts, how she had forged the misleading letter, stolen the key to the desk, and orchestrated the blackout by tampering with the gas valve. Each step, she admitted, was aimed at securing the manuscript's value, both for sale and for her claim. Poirot listened with respectful gravity. "Your motives may find some sympathy," he said gently, "but your methods are beyond pardon. Justice must follow." He summoned the butler, who appeared and stood ready. "Convey to Inspector Barnaby that he may now enter," Poirot instructed. The butler departed. Presently, a uniformed police inspector entered, bowing gravely. Poirot stepped aside. "Inspector, here is the full confession and the physical evidence." He handed over the file, the fragment, the thread, and the letter. "You have all you require." Inspector Barnaby thanked Poirot and, turning to Fletcher, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Miss Fletcher, I must ask you to accompany me." Fletcher inclined her head, her shoulders slumping as she allowed herself to be guided away. The family watched in stunned silence. Once the inspector and Fletcher had departed, Poirot returned to the hearth and addressed the remaining company. "The manuscript may now be restored to its rightful heirs, and Sir Lionel's memory honored in full." He paused, letting his words resonate. Lady Hawthorne dabbed at her eyes. Edward rose to help her to her seat, while Celia sank beside her, her grief mingled with reluctant relief. Mr. Clark cleared his throat and ventured, "Monsieur Poirot, if I may, what of my role in all this? I fear I have been caught in a snare not of my own making." Poirot smiled kindly. "Mr. Clark, you bore muddy boots because you walked in the rose garden at midnight seeking calm. You crossed out print runs in purple ink because you feared loss of reputation, not out of guilt. Your only crime was ambition. You may proceed with the memoir's publication as planned." Clark exhaled. "Thank you, sir." He bowed respectfully. At last, Poirot turned to Lady Hawthorne. "Madam, you have borne this trial with admirable dignity. Your devotion to your husband's memory has been unwavering. May these revelations bring you the peace that was denied him in his final hours." She inclined her head, tears shining in her eyes. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot took up his cane. "I shall leave you now, dear friends," he said softly. "May Belmore Hall know contentment once more." He paused at the door. "And remember, truth, though sometimes hidden, shall always emerge in the clear light of day." With that, he stepped into the corridor, his tall silhouette receding, the echo of his precise footsteps the final note in a symphony of justice. Outside, the morning sky was unblemished, and the lawn stretched green and silent. Within Belmore Hall, a sense of calm had settled at last. The mystery lay resolved, the guilty held to account, and the future unburdened by secrets. Hercule Poirot, having once more exercised the triumph of reason, departed into the soft glow of dawn.